My man Czar make tracks like this.
What's going on, y'all? Want to give y'all my first impressions of the PreSonus VaderPort 8. This is the new production controller from PreSonus. So for a long time, I've wanted a controller to help me get away from the mouse and more hands-on control. I was going to get a Euphonics or now Avid mix or artist mix. I can't think of the model number, but when Avid took that over, I wasn't sure how much support that product would have for other DAWs, so that kept me away from that. Then I almost got a Softube Console 1, which was a really cool, innovative product for Pro Audio, but it only works with Softube plugins. I have all the Softube plugins, but I use more than just Softube plugins, so I figured that wasn't going to work for me. So now we've got the VaderPort 8. So once I got the VaderPort unboxed, and the first thing it tells you to do is download the Universal Control and run that. It had me update the firmware. I could not get my VaderPort to update the firmware, and this seems to be because I'm running a older Mac OS version, which is Yosemite 10.10. Huge shout out to Johnny Jeeb, who I got in contact with, and he showed me he walked me through manually loading the newest firmware to basically make my VaderPort functional, because with that 1.0 firmware, for those first 15 minutes I was trying to use it, really disappointed in what I had there. Now I've got the new firmware on, and I've done 2 mixes with it now, and I'm really impressed and really loving it. So if you get one, make sure that you're not on that 1.0 firmware. And even though the Universal Control was telling me that the firmware had updated, which is what was really confusing me, because it told me it updated the firmware, yet once I checked the firmware version, it hadn't done anything. So if you're on an older version of Mac OS X, you may have to manually load the firmware to get you going. Okay, so with that aside, so when I originally pulled it out and looked at all the buttons on it, I kind of told myself that there's no way I'm going to use all these buttons, and I also told myself it would take me a while to learn all of these buttons. But within 2 mixes, I've really got a handle on this thing, and I use pretty much all of the buttons. They're all usable. And I want to point out, so I know someone said that it doesn't have a master fader. You can hit this master button here, and then this knob controls your master fader. Not a big deal for me, since I analog some. I never use my master fader main out in Studio One, so the extra 9th fader really wasn't a problem to me. And I kind of understand why PreSonus didn't add a 9th fader, because your master fader isn't something that I would normally be adjusting all the time anyway, moving up and down. So I really feel like you don't need a dedicated fader for that. So I understand that. The automation controls, it took me a minute to figure out what this trim was, and I found out that is a feature that's not available in Studio One yet. It is a Pro Tools feature, actually, for volume trim automation. Besides that, I've got a handle on all of the other buttons. Everything is nicely laid out to me as well. Like, everything makes sense. Now, one thing that I expected to be able to do that I can't do, which PreSonus can easily add in a firmware update, is to be able to select multiple tracks from the VaderPort. You would think logically by holding shift and selecting multiple tracks, you'd be able to select more than one track at once, but that does not work. Again, in Studio One, if I hold shift and select multiple tracks, I would highlight multiple tracks at once. So that is just one feature I would like to see them add. Another thing that's kind of odd to me is how the ARM tracks works. So I would logically thinking, I would think that I'd be able to just select a track and then hit ARM, and it would arm that track. However, once I hit ARM, I have to then select the track that I want to arm. Just not how I would expect it to work, but again, not really a big deal. You just have to understand how that works. I know someone said that it didn't have metering. The FaderPort 8 does have metering. You just hit the track button a couple times and you'll get your metering. It also shows you gain reduction as well, which is pretty cool. But I'm really impressed with this controller. Like I said, the only thing I really want to be able to do is that I've found that I can't do so far is select multiple tracks at once. Also, another thing, the shift. So if you can hit shift or hold shift and select other options. Sometimes I've noticed that once I select another option, shift will still be lit up and I'm not noticing it. And then I get to pressing buttons and something different is happening than what I expect to happen because the shift is on. Just as a recommendation, maybe if the shift is on like that, maybe just having it flashing, and that will kind of alert you that the shift is on. Because like I said, with it lit like that, I'm not really aware of it, that the shift is engaged. And those are the only two really minor complaints that I have about it. But and just to show you how I've got it in my setup here, let me step back some. So I'm gonna have to get a bigger desk now, and I've waited to get a controller before getting a desk because I didn't know how big the controller that I would get would be. I would like to, of course, have my keyboard, the FaderPort 8, and the monitor station all sitting on the desk. So yeah, I'm going to be looking into a desk next. But again, really impressed with the FaderPort 8. It really allows me to go hands-on. And favorite feature I almost forgot to mention, if you hit this, well, let me back up. So like I said, I really wanted it for editing plugins, and we've got an option to edit plugins here. But when you do that, the faders then turn into controls for the plugins. Not really practical to me is turning knobs by moving faders. However, you've got and this is just genius, the link button. I'm trying to let that focus here. But this link button here, once you press the link button, any parameter that you hover over with your mouse, you can turn. So it'll turn this knob into anything that your mouse hovers over. And that's just genius, because using the edit plugins, you would have to, for your third-party plugins, you can certainly map them to the faders. However, of course, I didn't want to go through all of my plugins and map them, but with the link button, you don't have to map them. Just hit link, and then that one knob controls any parameter that your mouse is hovering over. So that is just really genius. I've also seen people complain about not having dedicated pan knobs for each fader. I don't pan more than one track at one time, so that's not a problem. However, if you want to do that, though there's not a dedicated pan knob for each fader, there is a pan button here, and if you press the pan button, the faders will move to adjust pan. So you can pan with the faders, up being right and down being left. So if you want to pan multiple tracks at one time, you can do it easily that way. So pretty much that is it, though. Again, really impressed. PreSonus did a really good job here, and I'm surprised that it took this long for, well, I guess, one, for them to come out with it, but also anyone else to really come with a good option for a controller. But the great thing about the FaderPort is that we all know that it was designed to integrate with Studio One. So as Studio One grows and evolves, the FaderPort 8 can evolve with it. That's another reason that I chose this over any other controller, mainly the Behringer X-Touch, because that is one that I also took a look at as well. But, when I told myself that, once Studio One version 3, 4, 5 comes out, the FaderPort 8 will be able to evolve with it. PreSonus isn't going to leave it behind. Whereas, I don't know if I really trust Behringer to update their controller to work with additional features that was added in Studio One or any other DAW. All right, so those are my first impressions of the PreSonus FaderPort 8. Any questions, leave them in the comments. I'll get back with you, and I'll catch y'all next time.